Good morning, class. Welcome to our week 7 lecture presentation. You might notice this looks a little different because this is a great presentation brought to you by the Purdue University Online Writing Lab. Thought the information in it was great, so I didn't want to mess up a good thing. So we'll go ahead and utilize this awesome presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you may realize, we are moving into a new essay, and that has to do with a literary analysis. And you're going to have the option of choosing your own group of different essays to look at, and it can be from our textbook, which I mentioned some in the announcement, and also you can find it in the syllabus. Some different options on the type of essay you want to do from the textbook. I make some suggestions, but you're welcome to go to the library. Crowder has an online library that you can check through. You really get to choose. I suggest short works, so essay size, perhaps some. I even would allow for fiction, so short stories and that kind of stuff, but we're going to be practicing this analysis type of thing. So let's see, what is a literary analysis? It is literary, so that means we're choosing works that are a literature type of fashion. So we're not looking at Us Magazine or our latest movie, which actually we're looking at books and short stories and essays that are professionally published. It is an analysis. So this is pretty obvious, right? So it's literary and it's an analysis. So an analysis is what we're going to talk about, what that is. And I mean, look at the word analyze. So what is it to analyze something? So we're analyzing works of literary value. So basically, it is an argument. So, yeah, strange, huh? So you're looking at it like, I thought I was just going to talk about a book or something. It's not a book report. A literary analysis is definitely not a book report. It is more about digging deeper into the text, and you're going to argue a point. You're going to have a point of view that you have about the text, and you're going to argue it. You're going to show how you believe what you believe about the text is true. So you have to be able to prove it with evidence, and you have to be able to show the audience that what you're saying is correct. And that goes through using source material, using expert opinions, critiques, and also using the works themselves. And like I said, it can involve research and secondary sources. So how is it literary? Let's go through this a little bit, step by step. So usually a literary analysis will involve a discussion of a text as writing, thus the term literary, which means have to do with letters. So it's a piece of writing, not a movie, not an advertisement, although we are practicing analysis with advertisements. We're actually looking at pieces of writing, and it will also use certain concepts that are specifically associated with literature. So, of course, we have things like that go with stories. So you can do nonfiction or fiction with this. It's up to you. But the basic things, so we have plot, setting, narrative, point of view, characterization, symbols, metaphors, the genre of writing, irony or ambiguity. We also have historical context, social, political, economic context. We have ideology or multiple voices for various critical orientations. So you can look at it from a particular critical eye and a particular literary theory. So all of these are concepts that you can utilize when you're doing a literary analysis. Not saying that you should use all of them in one paper. That's really extensive. I'm not looking to grade 20-page essays here. So you're actually going to choose particular elements to analyze. So if you're looking at two different works, now I want you to email me if you have a particular idea that you on which topic you want to look at. which work you want to look at. If you're really set on doing something longer than a short story or an essay, that is up to you. You just need to get it approved by me. Usually, if you're looking at a whole book, then we're going to just narrow it down to one work rather than two. So keep that in mind. So if you wanted to actually analyze a whole book, that is something to take a look at. You can also analyze poems. Poems are definitely within that realm, but of course we're going to have to look at a body of poems, not just one or two. But you do have to look at literature from the basic concepts and dynamics that literature presents. So that's all these different things in the list here. So how can I learn more? What can I do to prepare for a literary analysis? Of course, we're going to use our textbook. So we have some information in the textbook to look at, but there are various handbooks of literary terms available in most of your libraries. So you could go to your local library. You can use the Crowder Library. Just look up, literary analysis, or look up literary terms, and you should be able to find different sources. Also, literary criticism. One of the sources that you might find yourself using to back up your point of view would be other critics' points of view about the topic that you have chosen. So, for instance, if you decide to write a literary analysis of George Orwell's 1984, it's a book that you've always wanted to read, and why not now, right? So, if you wanted to choose that novel, and you want to generate ideas, look for literary criticisms of the novel. You can get a variety of viewpoints, get really interesting ideas from that, and it can help you get a point of view. So, for instance, one literary theory, so a literary theory is something that actually looks at the work through a certain point of view or lens. So one literary theory would be, let me think of one that would be good for this one. Marxism. So Marxism looks at a work through the lens of the people, the masses. So in that historical context, how would this work affect the people of that time period? So looking at, 1984 was written actually in 1948 by George Orwell. What was life like at that point? How does Orwell depict the masses, the group, the people that are at, the basic structure of society, and how does that differ from what people were like in 1948? And so you can look at it from that context. So there's lots of different theories out there that just give you kind of a pathway to take in terms of looking at the work that you choose. So Marxism, feminism, you have formalist literary critique, post-colonial. There's lots of different things that you could look at. And we're going to get more into that as we move along toward this essay. There's a handbook called Handbook to Literature by Harman and Holman, so you can definitely check that one out. Look in your library for that as well. So what is an analysis? Let's get a little deeper here. So an analysis of a literary work may discuss how the various components of an individual work relate to each other. So you're actually looking at the things within one work to show what is the message that the author is trying to portray, or what are some ideas that connect to our culture, that connect to different viewpoints, politics, and that kind of stuff. You can look at two separate literary works, which is kind of the main idea for our paper coming up, is looking at two separate works and how they deal with similar concepts and forms. Almost like a compare and contrast, but it goes a little deeper in terms of it wants to create one meaning from the two works. And you could also look at how concepts and forms in literary works relate to a larger aesthetic. So that could be political or social, economic, religious contexts, that kind of stuff. So you can look at it in the big picture kind of thing. So if we looked again at the 1984 by George Orwell as our example, you can, obviously it has a very large political context, and you can look at it from in terms of, was Orwell being prophetic in terms of his projection of socialism in our society? So in 1948, what was his projection of what socialism could do to a society, and how does that relate to now? That might be a topic that you can move forward with. But yeah, so you can compare the works to those bigger picture items as well, which I think is pretty interesting. So how is it an argument? When you're writing a literary analysis, you're going to focus on specific attributes of a text. So you're not going to just report on the summary of the work. Like I said earlier, it's not a book report. It's not going to be just a summary. You're actually looking at particular elements in a work to make a point. And when you discuss those attributes, you want to make sure that you are making a specific arguable point about those attributes. So if you're going to discuss, the political context of 1984, and you want to actually make an arguable point about that. Maybe the point is that George Orwell clearly was clairvoyant in his work by projecting how socialism can develop in a society, and that would be your point of view. So you actually have to have an argument or a point of view that you're going to project for that literary analysis. And so you're going to defend those points with reason and evidence from the text. So that might be, so you look at the Ministry of Truth in 1984, and how does that relate to something in our current world and socialist type of ideas that are going on in our political structures around the world. Maybe you're going to look at the Ministry of Love and how that relates. So you're actually going to look at things from the text and draw conclusions upon those based on your main idea. So whether that's political or religious, or you're looking at comparing and contrasting, whatever it is that you decide that you want to argue, that you want to present as a major idea in your analysis, you're going to have to defend those things through the text that you have read. So let's look at some possible thesis statements. So this is based on Moby Dick. So Moby Dick is about the problem of evil. So that is a possible thesis statement. I wouldn't say that it's the best one. It does present an overall main idea. So we know that the essay would be about Moby Dick. We know that we have that problem of evil, which would be a theme, right? So we have themes in literary works, and the theme would be that problem with evil. And that would be something that you can analyze, but as far as a thesis statement, this is really not going to take you very far. The next one says Moby Dick is boring and pointless. This is not an analysis in terms of what are we doing with the text itself. So how can we prove that it's boring and pointless? There is actually a literary theory that is based on the audience's reaction of the work. So that is a possibility. You can prove that it's boring and pointless, but you're going to have to do it through analysis and show how there are elements in the text that are boring and pointless. You'd have to be able to really argue that. I don't think you can with this particular work, but what to each his own. Moby Dick is about a big white whale. This particular sentence doesn't give any type of analysis. We don't see an argument here at all. It's just telling what it's about. Remember, this is not a book report. We are not just plain summarizing a work. We're actually going to analyze elements in the work to make an arguable point. So the last one, this would be the best one of the four, as you probably can tell. The use of whiteness in Moby Dick illustrates the uncertainty about the meaning of life that Ishmael expresses through the novel. So here we have a clear point of view. We have the topic, which is which is obviously the book Moby Dick, but then we also have a overall theme and throughout the book, which would be that meaning of life and the uncertainty of the meaning of life. And then we also have a symbol, whiteness, that the writer is going to focus on. So yeah, you can look at symbols and look at themes and how they connect and how they interact within the work. And this is much more specific. We know where the paper's going, so this would be something to look at if you read Moby Dick and you want to use that for your literary analysis. But really, you can look at symbols and themes and how they interact within a work, and that could be a point of view that you take with the literary analysis. So then, how would you support the thesis statement that you choose? Of course, we've gone over this, I believe, once before, but when you are trying to prove a point, you want to make sure that you use evidence to back up what you're having to say. So that can be from a variety of sources. First of all, you're going to use evidence from within the works that you read. So you're going to use quotations from the works. You're going to summarize elements from the text. It's okay to add summary within a literary analysis, but it's not okay to only summarize for the analysis. So you might add direct quotations, you might summarize different parts of the work, and you might also paraphrase. See, this is where we start looking at, okay, am I going to be able to write this short paper analysis over a huge book? So that's where you have to start editing yourself and looking at, okay, it might be a little bit more doable to choose a couple essays to look at rather than an entire book, but it's up to you. I'm really giving you leeway on what you want to do in terms of the literary analysis. I want you to read something that interests you, that grabs your attention, that you can actually argue a point about and form an opinion about. If you read something that's boring and pointless, it's not very fun to write about it. So I do want to leave that open to you. I can give you some different suggestions as well. So you can also find other critics' opinions to back up your point of view. Absolutely, that is definitely something you can do. Look for literary analysis over the types of works that you're doing. Think about this when you're trying to choose your works. Okay, if you're going to find other critics' opinions on the works that you're choosing, you probably need to choose works that are well-known and well-established literary works. When we start looking at the works within our textbook, those are short essays. It's going to be a little bit harder to find critics that have looked at those essays specifically. You'll have to go a little bit broader in your research in terms of getting more ideas based on the topics in those essays rather than the essays themselves. If you choose a well-known novel or a well-known short story, a well-known poem, you're going to be able to find more outside source material to back up what you're saying. So, for instance, you could look at Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. That's a book that a lot of high school students read. I know I had to read it in high school. So if you wanted to analyze Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, you're going to find a ton of information, lots of critics' analysis on that book. But if you choose a more recent book, even that has been published in the last year, it's going to be a little harder to find that. So keep that in mind when you're choosing what you want to write about. You can also, but there are options out there other than looking at somebody else's critique of the work that you've done. You can also look at historical and social context. So if the work was written in 1986, the perspective that the author creates may be different than if the work was written in 2001 after September 11th. So you can look at that historical, social, political context of when the work was written and also when the work is projected. So for instance, if you choose a historical novel, something that was written recently, but it's based on things that have happened in the past, you also have that availability of looking at the historical evidence out there to back up what the writer has done. And also just remember to read carefully when you are working toward this literary analysis. I suggest getting a physical text of the work, whether that's printing out or if it's actually going and buying the book, that you can write all over. Take notes in the margins. You can put post-it notes to to make sure that you remember that page, that you can underline passages. I think that's really helpful when you're analyzing, because we're going to carefully read these things. We're not just going to read for entertainment. We're actually looking to analyze the context of the document. So being able to write all over it and take notes and make those notes throughout your work is going to be helpful. So I do suggest having a print version that you can actually have as your own, I guess, would be a good idea. So what is a secondary source? We have primary sources, which would be actually the book that we are looking at. That's a primary source. But what is a secondary source? So a secondary source is a book or article that discusses the text that you are discussing. So it's actually something that is from a secondary viewpoint. So you have the book itself, or the essay themselves, or the poems themselves. Those are primary sources. Perhaps you might have an interview of the author. That would be a primary source. What the author has actually said about the book. That would be a transcript of an interview, not someone's viewpoint of the interview. But secondary sources, when you have outside perspectives looking in to do their own analysis or discussion of the text. This could also be a book or article that discusses a theory related to an argument that you are making. So those literary critics out there and those theories out there, that's going to be a secondary source. Also, a book or article that discusses the social or historical context of the text you're talking about. All of those are secondary sources, and they are definitely sources that you can use to back up what you're saying. All of these are viable sources. They just have different roles to play in a paper. So how do you find sources for your work? Well, you could definitely look at different types of resources. You can go to your library, you go to your dictionary, look at biographies of authors. We have some different specific examples that Purdue gives us: MLA International Bibliography, the Dictionary of Literary Biographies. I think that those are good works because they're kind of overall pictures of things, so that might be something to look at if you have it in your local library. And then discipline-specific sources. So, for instance, if you are looking at American literature itself, so you can look at the history and life for American literature. You can have survey books that are about lots of different literary figures from a particular genre. I know that they're out there for short stories. I know that they're out there for English writers, for American writers, for world writers. You could use search engines. Obviously, we have the Crowder Online Library available to us, but you can also use Google Scholar and that kind of stuff, search engines looking for secondary sources. And of course, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to ask me. So it's important to integrate these sources into your work. So you are required to use outside source material for this upcoming paper. And when you use secondary sources, be sure to show how they relate to your thesis statement. So how do these sources back up what you're trying to say? Don't just stick sources into your papers and expect the reader to get it. You actually need to make those connections yourself in the text of your document. Try not to overuse secondary sources or really any source for that matter. The main element of a paper should always be your own voice. And remember, this is your paper, your argument, and the sources are there just to help you out, to really back up what you're saying, to give some credence to what you say without taking over your topic. And of course, we never plagiarize. And I do have access to check for plagiarism, so please do not plagiarize. Make sure you put quotation marks around material that needs quotation marks, that we cite our sources with MLA format, and so on and so forth. Now, the online writing lab for Purdue University is a great source on how to set up MLA citations, so definitely check that out as well. Now, when you're writing a literary analysis, it's important to be familiar with those literary terms. Be familiar with your metaphors and similes and plot, sequence, and all those kinds of things. So I already had a list earlier in this presentation, so you need to be familiar with those. You need to analyze specific items. So, if you are discussing the political context, I want to see, direct quotes from the work and show how that direct quote connects to the political context that you're looking at. So you're actually analyzing specific elements. You're not giving just an overview. And like I've said before, make an argument. Make sure that you have a specific point of view that you are trying to prove, and the entire paper should work toward proving that point. Make appropriate use of secondary sources and consult myself, any tutors. We do have access to those online tutoring availability through Smart Thinking, which is awesome. So definitely utilize the tools that you have available to get ready for this analysis. So these are just the online writing lab for Purdue information. So you can check that out. I do want to make sure that you understand where we're going with the literary analysis. We have a few weeks before this paper is due, so we're definitely going to go into this in more detail. But I hope that this was helpful to you as we get started with analysis. And as always, feel free to send me any questions that you might have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get our week started. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the discussion board. Bye.